They don't pay you to watch for fires. They pay you to be the bait. I know that now. The journal I found proves it. The man before me, Thomas, he broke one of their rules. They never found his body. All they found was this book and a list. The sun is setting, the temperature is dropping, and I'm faced with my first choice. Follow the ravings of a dead man, or trust my own sanity in a place that feels like it's starting to watch me back. The final leg of the journey was a lesson in insignificance. The helicopter, a noisy, vibrating metal dragonfly, skimmed over an endless carpet of green and grey. Below us, the forests of British Columbia weren't just trees. They were a single, living entity. A vast, breathing organism that had swallowed mountains whole. Rivers snaked through the valleys like silver veins, and the occasional lake was a shard of polished sky embedded in the earth. I was Alex, a 28-year-old man running from a life that had become too loud, too crowded, too full of ghosts. I'd sought out the quietest, most remote job I could find, a seasonal posting as a fire lookout at the newly reopened Sentinel Peak station. The recruiter had called it the ultimate social distancing. I called it an escape. The pilot, a grizzled man named Jed, whose face was a roadmap of squint lines, hadn't said much for the past hour. As the tower came into view, a skeletal finger of steel and glass pointing at the heavens from the highest peak, he finally spoke over the headset, his voice a gravelly crackle. "There she is, your own private kingdom for the next 3 months." It didn't look like a kingdom. It looked like a cage. Perched precariously on the bald granite crown of the mountain, the tower was a single 15 by 15-foot room encased in windows, sitting atop a 50-foot lattice of weathered steel. It was the only man-made object visible in 360 degrees of raw, untamed wilderness. As we descended, the scale of my isolation truly hit me. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the rotor blades was the last heartbeat of civilization I'd hear for a long time. Jed helped me unload my gear, a duffel bag of clothes, a box of books, and enough non-perishable food to survive an apocalypse. He performed a cursory check of the tower's primary systems, the solar panels, the backup generator, the sophisticated radio console. "Everything's green," he grunted, avoiding my eyes. "Propane tanks are full. Water cisterns topped off. You're all set." "What about the last guy?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Thomas, was it? The recruiter mentioned he left early due to a family emergency." Jed paused, his hand on the helicopter's door. He finally looked at me and his eyes held a strange, weary pity. "Yeah, something like that. Look, kid, just do your job. Keep your eyes on the horizon, report any smoke, and stick to the checklist." "They give you a checklist?" "I think so. It's in the welcome packet." "Right. The checklist," he said, the words feeling heavy and deliberate. "Follow it. To the letter. Especially the night shift protocols. Don't get creative." He offered a curt nod, climbed into the cockpit, and without another word the helicopter lifted off, its noise slowly fading until it was devoured by the immense, profound silence of the mountains. And then I was alone. The silence was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, broken only by the whisper of the wind against the glass and the frantic thumping of my own heart. For the first hour, I felt a giddy sense of freedom. This was it. No emails, no traffic, no people. Just me, the sky, and a million trees. I unpacked my things, arranging my books on a small shelf and organizing my food in the compact pantry. The tower was Spartan but clean. A single cot was folded against one wall, a small kitchenette occupied another, and the center of the room was dominated by the radio console and a large circular map of the surrounding region, the Osborne Fire Locator. It was as I was wiping down the central console that I found them. Tucked neatly under the base of the map, almost as if left for me to find, were 2 items that didn't belong. The first was a handsome, if thoroughly beaten up, leather-bound journal. The cover was dark with age and moisture, its spine cracked and peeling. There was no name on it, but I knew instinctively that it belonged to Thomas. The second item was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, folded in half. It felt old, the text typed on what must have been an ancient typewriter. The ink faded in places. Curiosity piqued, I picked up the paper first. Unfolding it, I saw a title, centered at the top, Night Shift Operating Rules, Sentinel Peak. My brow furrowed. This must be the checklist Jed was talking about, though it seemed strangely informal. I began to read. Upon official sunset, the ground-level hatch must be locked from the inside. It is not to be opened for any reason, or for any person, until official sunrise. There are no exceptions. Between the hours of 02 Khoaizir and 04 Wafu, the primary radio may pick up vocal transmissions. These can range from static-laced whispers to clear voices. Some may sound familiar. It is of critical importance that you do not answer. Should the tower's interior lights flicker 3 distinct times, move immediately to the center of the room, away from all windows. Do not look outside for a minimum of 1 hour. Whatever is out there dislikes being seen. Ignore any scratching sounds against the window panes. They are only testing your curiosity. If you observe a single undocumented campfire in the forest below, note it in the log as an atmospheric anomaly. Do not attempt to make visual or radio contact. Do not stare at it for long. Never, under any circumstances, activate the exterior spotlight after midnight. Some things in the dark are meant to stay there. I read the list twice, then a third time. A slow smile spread across my face, and I let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded thin and absurd in the vast emptiness. It was a prank. It had to be. A classic hazing ritual for the new guy. Some old-timer in the forestry service probably cooked this up decades ago to spook the rookies. It was brilliantly done, I had to admit. Each rule was perfectly crafted to prey on the anxieties of being alone in the wilderness at night. Rule 1. Locking the hatch. Standard procedure in bear country probably, just embellished for dramatic effect. Rule 2. Radio voices. Easy to explain. Tropospheric ducting, radio wave bounce. Any number of atmospheric phenomena could cause stray signals to come through on a powerful receiver like this one, especially at night. The familiar voices part was a nice, creepy touch. Rule 3. Flickering lights. A generator that needs servicing, most likely. The instruction to hide was pure campfire story gold. Rule 4. Scratching sounds. A bird, a bat, a branch scraping in the wind. Simple. Rule 5. The campfire. A hunter or hiker who didn't file a permit. Happens all the time. Rule 6. The spotlight. A clever bit of reverse psychology. Telling me not to do it just made me want to flick it on the second midnight rolled around. It was all perfectly, rationally explainable. This was the product of a lonely, bored, and slightly sadistic mind. I pictured Thomas, the guy before me, sitting here and typing this up with a chuckle, imagining my reaction. He probably left early because his family emergency was that he was dying of boredom. I set the list down on the console next to his journal. I picked up the journal, running my thumb over the worn leather. I was tempted to read it, to see if his entries corroborated my prank theory, but I decided against it. It felt like an invasion of privacy, even if he had left it behind. Plus, I didn't want to spoil the story for myself. I'd play along for a night or two. It might be fun. For the next few hours, I settled into my new life. I made radio contact with the regional dispatch, a friendly female voice who welcomed me to the post and confirmed my operational status. I made a simple dinner of canned chili and crackers, and I watched the sun. I've seen sunsets all over the world, but I had never seen anything like this. From my perch atop the world, I watched the light bleed out of the sky. The endless green forest below was set ablaze in hues of orange, pink, and deep violet. The shadows in the valleys grew longer, stretching like grasping fingers until they merged into a single, seamless ocean of darkness. The beauty was so profound, so absolute, that it was almost painful. For a moment I forgot all about the strange list of rules. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Then, the last sliver of the sun dipped below the most distant mountain range, and the world was plunged into twilight. The temperature inside the glass room dropped noticeably. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper all day, now began to keen with a low, mournful sound as it whipped around the tower. The darkness that filled the valleys wasn't just an absence of light. It felt like a presence. It was a thick, primordial blackness, dotted here and there by the impossibly bright pinpricks of stars. My eyes fell back to the console, to the typed sheet of paper. Rule 1. Upon official sunset, the ground-level hatch must be locked from the inside. Sunset was now official. The hatch at the bottom of the 50-foot ladder was, as far as I knew, unlocked. I scoffed. It was ridiculous. Who would be climbing a 50-foot tower in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night? A bear? A very, very ambitious raccoon? Still, Jed's words came back to me. Follow it. To the letter. He had seemed so serious. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of the room pressing in. The vast, empty wilderness outside the windows no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. I was in a glass box, a specimen on display for an audience of ancient trees and silent, stoic mountains. The thought was absurd, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "This is stupid, Alex," I muttered to myself, my voice sounding alien and intrusive. But I went to the trapdoor in the floor, the one that opened onto the landing at the top of the stairs. I descended the metal steps, my footsteps echoing in the enclosed stairwell. At the bottom, a heavy steel door led to the exterior catwalk. I didn't go outside. Instead, I turned my attention to the main hatch at the bottom of the tower, visible through the grated floor. There was a pulley system with a heavy-duty cable running down to it. A large, rusty lever on the wall next to me controlled the deadbolt. With a sigh that was part annoyance and part something else, a nascent, unwelcome flicker of unease, I grabbed the lever. It was stiff from disuse. I put my weight into it, and with a deep groaning thunk that echoed up the steel frame of the tower, the bolt slid home 50 feet below. I climbed back up to the main room, the finality of the sound still ringing in my ears. I was now officially sealed in for the night. I sat at the console, the list of rules illuminated by the single desk lamp. My earlier amusement was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet tension. It was just a prank, a joke. But as the darkness outside became absolute, and the wind howled a little louder, a small traitorous part of my brain couldn't help but wonder. What if it wasn't? The silence out here is a living thing, but I had no idea what the night truly held. I thought it was a prank, a story to tell my friends back home. Now I know better. If you want to hear how this story continues, and trust me you do, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. You won't want to miss what happened when the first rule was tested. The first few hours of the night passed in a state of suspended animation. I tried to lose myself in a paperback novel, but the words swam meaninglessly on the page. Every gust of wind was a footstep. Every creak of the aging steel frame was a prelude to something terrible. The silence between the gusts was worse. It was a listening silence, an expectant void that seemed to be waiting for me to make a sound, to betray my presence. My world had shrunk to the 15 by 15-foot circle of lamplight, a tiny island of fragile reality in an ocean of impenetrable, watching darkness. I felt like a deep-sea fish in a bathysphere, floating in an abyss where immense unseen things drifted just beyond the edge of the light. My gaze kept flicking to the clock on the radio console. 11:47 p.m. 12:30 a.m. 01:15 a.m. I was actively counting down to the time specified in the second rule, the witching hours between 2 and 4. A part of me, the rational, stubborn part that had gotten me through my life so far, desperately wanted the clock to tick past 04 down without incident. It would prove the list was a fiction, a simple gag. It would release the tension coiling in my gut and allow me to laugh at myself for being so easily spooked. But another, more ancient part of my brain, the part that inherited the fears of a million ancestors huddled around fires, was dreading it with a certainty that felt like a prophecy. I decided to busy myself with official tasks, a pathetic attempt to impose normalcy on the situation. I logged the hourly weather, wind speed, visibility, temperature. Everything was nominal. No anomalies, no fires. The world outside was behaving exactly as it should. It was the world described on the typed page that felt more real, more pressing. At 01:58, I made a fresh cup of coffee, my hands trembling just enough to make the spoon clatter against the ceramic mug. The sound was like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. I sat at the console watching the digital numbers. 01:59. My breath hitched in my chest. I stared at the radio, a formidable piece of equipment with dozens of dials and switches, its speaker a black, silent mouth. O2, Zaro. Nothing. Just the low, almost subliminal hum of the active circuitry. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. A wave of relief, so potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. See? It was all in my head. An elaborate prank, and I had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in hours. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter heat a welcome sensation. I was about to laugh, to finally break the spell, when a sound came from the speaker. It was static, the soft hissing sound of an empty channel, but it wasn't normal static. It had a strange cadence to it, a rising and falling rhythm like a slow, ragged breath. I leaned closer, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs again. The relief I'd felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. And then, through the static, a voice materialized. It was a woman's voice, faint and distorted, as if coming from a great distance. "Anyone hear me? Can anyone read me? Over." My training kicked in instantly. That was a distress call. My hand flew to the transmit button. Protocol was clear. Acknowledge, get a location, ascertain the nature of the emergency. "Hello? Please, I'm lost." The voice was clearer now, laced with a desperate, panicked sob. "My name is Sarah. I was hiking from Jasper Ridge, my compass. It broke. I can see a light, a tower. Please, if you can hear me, I'm so cold. Over." Jasper Ridge was over 80 miles away. It was impossible for a lost hiker to be anywhere near my position, let alone see my tower's low-wattage interior lights. It was a logical impossibility. Rule 2. Some may sound familiar. It is of critical importance that you do not answer. The rule screamed in my mind. My thumb hovered over the transmit button, a millimeter from depressing it. The woman was crying now, her sobs punctuated by chattering teeth. Every instinct I had, every shred of human decency urged me to respond, to offer comfort, to call for a search and rescue team. This was a human life at stake. A stupid, spooky list of rules couldn't possibly matter more than that. "Please," the voice whimpered. "I don't want to die out here. It's so dark." My resolve crumbled. It was a prank, but this part was cruel. Leaving a fake distress call unanswered was a fireable offense, possibly even criminal. I had to answer. I drew a breath to speak. "Alex?" The voice was no longer a stranger's. It was still the same woman. But the single word, my name, was infused with a chilling, personal plea. My blood turned to ice. A tremor started in my hand and shot up my arm. I snatched it back from the console as if the button were white-hot. No one knew my name. Jed, the pilot, was hours away. The regional dispatch was a disembodied voice over a scheduled call. No hiker, no prankster, no atmospheric anomaly could know my name. The static hissed and the voice was gone. Silence flooded the room once more, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a heavy, knowing silence. The prank was no longer a prank. The rational explanations, the neat little boxes I had put each rule into, had just been incinerated. Something was out there, in that colossal, unfeeling darkness. And it knew my name. My mind raced, desperately trying to construct a new reality that could accommodate this. Had Jed radioed ahead? Was this a test? A psychological evaluation for the job? But the raw, genuine terror I felt was not a metric on any test I'd ever heard of. It was primal. My eyes fell upon the leather journal, Thomas's journal. It was no longer an object of idle curiosity. It was now a potential Rosetta Stone for the nightmare I had stumbled into. With fumbling, unsteady hands, I pulled it towards me and opened it. The first dozen pages were filled with neat, looped cursive. Thomas documented the weather patterns, the wildlife sightings, the mundane details of a solitary existence. He wrote about the beauty of the sunsets, the frustration of a leaky faucet, the simple joy of a hot meal. He sounded sane, normal. Then, about 3 weeks into his entries, the tone began to change. The handwriting grew tighter, more angular. He started documenting things that weren't on the official log. October 12th. Radio started acting up tonight, right at 2 a.m., just like the old timers list said it would. Picked up a faint signal, Sounded like a man calling for his dog. It lasted for maybe 5 minutes. Must be a signal bounce. Strange though, very strange. I flipped forward, my heart pounding. The entries were getting shorter, more frantic. October 19th. The voices came again. Different this time. A little girl crying for her mother. It's a cruel trick of the airwaves, but it felt so real. I almost answered. The list is the only thing that stopped me. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being baited. My eyes scanned the page, searching. I found the entry that I was on some level dreading to find. The handwriting was a near illegible scrawl, the pen having pressed so hard it tore the paper in one spot. November 3rd. They learn. My God, they learn. It wasn't a stranger on the radio tonight. It was Helen. My Helen. Her voice clear as day, asking why I hadn't called, saying she was worried. It knew her name. It knew the little tremor in her voice when she's about to cry. It's rifling through my memories. It's wearing the voices of my loved ones like a mask. This isn't a phenomenon. It's a predator. And it's hunting. A wave of nausea washed over me. I slammed the journal shut. A predator. That's what it felt like. A cunning, patient intelligence that had dangled the perfect lure in front of me. A damsel in distress, and when that didn't work, it had sharpened the hook by using my name. It was studying me. Flicker. The main overhead light went out, plunging the room into the dim auxiliary glow of the console screens. Flicker. It came back on, blindingly bright for a second. My heart leaped into my throat. Flicker. The light went out and stayed out, leaving me in near total darkness. 3 distinct times. My mind screamed the words from the list. Rule 3. Should the tower's interior lights flicker 3 distinct times, move immediately to the center of the room, away from all windows. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled backward, my chair tipping over and crashing to the floor. I crawled on my hands and knees until I felt the metal base of the Osborne fire locator press against my back, the center of the room. I curled into a ball, my arms wrapped around my head, my back to the wraparound windows. My world was now the cold linoleum floor and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. The instruction was clear. Do not look outside for a minimum of 1 hour. What was out there? What disliked being seen? My imagination, supercharged with terror, supplied 100 monstrous forms. But what I felt was worse than any image. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with a static charge that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The temperature plunged, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the outside weather. And then I felt it. A presence. There are no words in the English language to adequately describe the sensation. It was a feeling of immense scale, of something ancient and vast focusing its attention entirely on the tiny glass box I was in. It was the feeling a mouse must have when the shadow of a hawk passes over it. I felt scrutinized, analyzed, and utterly, completely insignificant. It was a pressure against the windows, a weight on the very fabric of reality around the tower. I was certain that if I were to look, I wouldn't just see something, I would be seen, and in that act of mutual observation, my sanity would be irrevocably shattered. Time ceased to have meaning. I stayed huddled on the floor, squeezed into the smallest possible version of myself. Every second was an eternity of waiting for the glass to shatter, for the tower to buckle, for the end to come. And then a new sound began. So faint at first I thought I was imagining it. It was a dry, deliberate sound. A sound that had no place 50 feet in the air, in the middle of a stormless night. It was the sound of something sharp being dragged slowly, deliberately across the window pane behind me. Scrappy. A pause. Then, on a different window to my left. Screech. It was methodical. It was patient. It was rule number 4, arriving right on schedule. It was testing my curiosity. It was testing the locks. It was letting me know in no uncertain terms that I was trapped, and it was just getting started. The world shrank to the sound. Scrap, click, tick. It was not the mindless scraping of a branch. This was a sound with intent, articulate and inquisitive. It was the sound of a surgeon's tool probing a wound, searching for a nerve. My entire consciousness was focused on the thin panes of glass separating me from that sound and the entity producing it. I remained a tightly coiled knot of terror on the floor, my back pressed against the unyielding metal of the map stand, convinced that the slightest movement would betray me further. The hour of mandated blindness stretched into an epoch. I fought against the tidal pull of my own imagination. I pictured a long, chitinous claw, like an insect's leg, tipped with something unnaturally hard. Then I imagined a single broken fingernail, yellowed and sharp, attached to a hand I dared not visualize. The not knowing was the core of the horror. The sound was a question mark drawn in razors against the glass, and my sanity was the price of looking for the answer. My hand, slick with cold sweat, fumbled in my pocket for my phone. I needed a light, but I also needed a distraction, an anchor to a world where things made sense. With trembling fingers, I managed to turn on its flashlight, keeping the beam pointed directly at the floor, creating a pitifully small circle of illumination. In that meager light, I reached for the one thing that felt like a shield: Thomas's journal. Flipping through the pages, my frantic eyes searched for any mention of Rule 4. I found it nestled between entries detailing a supply helicopter's visit and a particularly vicious snowstorm. The handwriting was shakier than in earlier pages. November 9th. The lights flickered tonight. I did as the list instructed, moved to the center of the room. I felt it outside. It's a pressure, a weight, a psychic gravity. Then the scratching started. It's not an animal, it's not the wind, the sound is exploratory. It's trying to find the weakest point. Not in the glass, I don't think. In me. It wants a reaction. It wants me to look. It wants to be seen. I kept my eyes on the floor and recited the names of every player on the 72 Dolphins roster until it stopped. You have to fill your head with something else, or it will fill it for you. I clung to his words. It wants a reaction. So my inaction was a form of defiance. My terror was a shield. I focused on that, trying to block out the methodical, patient sound that was tracing the perimeter of my glass cage, window by window. It made a full circuit of the tower, a slow, deliberate patrol. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise it replaced. It was a loaded silence, pregnant with threat. I stayed frozen, straining my ears, listening for the sound's return, for the shattering of glass, for anything. But there was nothing, only the low moan of the wind, which now sounded like a sigh of relief in comparison. Minutes stretched. 10, 20. The oppressive presence I'd felt outside seemed to have receded. The air in the room felt lighter, the unnatural cold dissipating. Had it given up? Was the test over? Cautiously, I uncurled my limbs, my muscles screaming in protest from being held so tense for so long. I remained on the floor, not yet daring to stand, but the immediate suffocating fear had subsided into a state of high-strung paranoid alert. And that's when the next phase of the assault began. It wasn't a sound from the radio. It came from outside, carried on the wind, so faint at first I thought the strain was making me hallucinate. It was a voice, a woman's voice calling from the base of the tower. "Alex? Honey, is that you up there?" I froze, every muscle in my body locking into place. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years, not since the funeral. It was the voice of my mother. It was impossible. A complete, total, soul-crushing impossibility. My mother was buried in a cemetery in Ohio, 4,000 miles away. Yet the voice was perfect. It wasn't a cheap imitation like a bad phone connection. It was a perfect facsimile, imbued with all the warmth, the worry, the unique timbre that was hers and hers alone. It was a key cut specifically for the deepest lock in my heart. "Alex, please answer me." "The man who flew the helicopter, he said you were here. I was so worried I had to come see you. It's freezing down here, honey. Can you let me in?" A sob caught in my throat. My rational mind was a tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane of emotion. It was a trick. It had to be a trick. The thing outside, the hunter that Thomas wrote about, it had found a new mask to wear. It had rummaged through my memories and pulled out the most potent one it could find. But oh, it sounded so real. "I brought your favorite," the voice called out, a little stronger now, a little more desperate. "That stupid lemon meringue pie you like. It's going to get ruined out here. Alex, what's wrong? Why won't you answer me?" I squeezed my eyes shut, tears leaking from the corners. I could almost smell the pie. I could picture her standing at the base of the ladder, looking up, her face etched with concern. The memory was so vivid, so powerful, it felt more real than the cold floor beneath me. The entity wasn't just imitating a voice, it was projecting a complete sensory illusion, a weaponized memory. This was the true test. The radio voices were an impersonal threat. The scratching was a physical one. This was an attack on my soul. It was designed to make me break Rule 1, do not open the hatch for any reason or for any person, by making it an act of cruelty not to. It was also a test of Rule 3 because to verify her presence I would have to look. Please, Alex. The voice was breaking now, a heart-shattering tremor of fear entering it. There's something in the woods. I think it's watching me. Please unlock the door, I'm scared. A guttural sound of anguish escaped my lips. I crawled over to the journal, my only source of scripture in this unholy place. I frantically searched the pages, looking for an entry, for any guidance. I found one, short and brutal. November 21st. It used my daughter's laughter. Outside the hatch. Laughter, then crying, begging for her daddy. I bit my tongue until it bled to keep from screaming back. It knows who you love. It knows who you've lost. It will use them to pry you open. You have to remember they are gone. What is outside is not them. It is an echo. It is a trap. It is not them. I repeated the words like a mantra, whispering them into the cold air. It's not her. It's not her. It's not her. But the voice outside seemed to hear my resolve. It changed its tactic. You're just like your father, the voice suddenly shrieked, the warmth gone, replaced by a cold, familiar anger. Hiding away, shutting everyone out. I didn't raise you to be a coward. You open this door right now, young man. The shock of it was like a physical blow. It had access to that memory too. The arguments, the guilt, the bitter words left unsaid. It was flinging the contents of my own heart at the windows, looking for a crack. The siege was no longer physical. It was happening inside my own skull. For what felt like another hour, it continued its assault, alternating between desperate pleas and cruel. Cutting remarks pulled directly from my deepest insecurities. I stayed on the floor, my knuckles white as I gripped the journal, my sanity fraying with every word that drifted up from below. Finally, as the faintest hint of gray began to soften the absolute black of the eastern sky, the voice faded, as if the approaching light were a solvent, dissolving the illusion. Silence returned. A true empty silence this time. I lay there, a hollowed-out wreck, until the sun finally broke over the horizon, flooding the tower with the clean, honest light of day. The interior lights flickered back on. The nightmare was over, for now. Shaking, I pulled myself to my feet. My body ached, my throat was raw. I stumbled to the windows, my terror from the night now transformed into a morbid, exhaustive curiosity. I looked down. There was nothing there. No footprints in the soft earth around the tower's concrete base. No discarded pie. No sign that anyone or anything had been there at all. The forest was pristine, still, and utterly indifferent. As I scanned the horizon, performing my official duties on autopilot, my eyes caught something. Far to the northwest, maybe 5 or 6 miles out, a thin, lazy plume of white smoke was rising from the dense canopy of trees. A campfire. It was in a sector of the park that was closed for the season, with no active permits for campers or hunters. It was exactly where a fire shouldn't be. Rule 5. If you observe a single, undocumented campfire in the forest below, note it in the log as an atmospheric anomaly. My blood ran cold. It was the final piece of the night's performance. I walked over to the official station logbook, my movements stiff and robotic. I picked up the pen. For a moment, I considered writing the truth. Unidentified smoke signal, possible trespasser. But the thought of the consequences of breaking the rules that had, against all odds, gotten me through the night was too terrifying to contemplate. I was a part of this system now. My skepticism was a luxury I could no longer afford. My hand shaking, I wrote the date, the time, the coordinates, and in the description column, the 2 words that felt like a betrayal of reality itself: atmospheric anomaly. I closed the logbook, the lie sealed within it. My eyes drifted back to the journal. There was a margin note next to an entry about another such fire, Thomas's scrawl was tight, paranoid. They light it for you. After a long night, it's a signal, a beacon. It looks warm, doesn't it? Inviting. It's an invitation to come down, to walk out into the woods, to join the party. Don't ever be tempted to go looking for the source. Some invitations, once accepted, can never be declined. I stared out the window at the distant, innocuous wisp of smoke. It didn't look like a threat. It looked like a promise of warmth, of companionship, an invitation. And I understood, with a certainty that chilled me more than the scratching or the voices, that the entity wasn't just trying to break into my tower. It was trying to lure me out of it. Daylight used to be a promise, a symbol of safety and clarity. Here, it was merely an intermission. The sun climbed the sky, dutifully painting the endless wilderness in brilliant, indifferent hues, but it brought no warmth to the chill that had taken root in my bones. The tower no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the observation platform in a predator's enclosure. I spent the day in a fugue state, my movements sluggish, my thoughts a toxic slurry of fear and exhaustion. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a lurking shape. Every whisper of the wind carried the ghost of my mother's voice. Out on the horizon, the thin plume of smoke from the anomaly continued its lazy ascent, a constant, unwavering signal from their world to mine, a silent testament to the previous night's reality. My official duties were a farce. I logged the weather, scanned the horizon for smoke, and spoke into the radio with a voice I barely recognized as my own, reporting an all clear to the regional dispatcher. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. All clear. The world had never been less clear. The fundamental laws of reality had been tried and convicted in a single night, and I was the sole witness to their execution. My skepticism, once a shield, was now a shattered ruin, and all that was left was the stark, terrifying acceptance of my situation. The leather-bound journal was the only object in the room that held any meaning. It was more than a book. It was a survival manual, a holy text, and a final testament all in one. Thomas was no longer just a name. He was a presence, a ghost, who had walked this same path of dawning horror. I had dismissed him as a man broken by solitude, but I now understood that he had been a soldier in a war I didn't know existed, and this journal was his last dispatch from the front lines. I needed to understand how his war ended. I didn't just read the last pages. I started again from the very beginning, devouring every word, searching for a subtext I had previously missed. I was looking for a pattern, a weakness in the enemy, an escape clause in the suffocating contract of the rules. I traced his psychological decline page by page. He arrived much as I did, pragmatic, slightly awed by the beauty and amused by the spooky list of rules. I saw his amusement curdle into unease, his unease fester into fear, and his fear metastasize into a desperate, all-consuming paranoia. He chronicled the entity's escalating tactics with a chilling precision. It was an intelligence that learned, adapted, and refined its methods. After he ignored the generic distress calls on the radio, it started using voices that were subtly familiar. A news anchor he often watched, a singer from his favorite band. When he resisted the temptation of the strange campfire, he began noticing things during the day. December 2nd. I see them sometimes at the tree line, just at the edge of my vision. They're not people, more like distortions in the air, man-shaped smudges against the trees. The moment I try to focus on them with the binoculars, they're gone. Am I losing my mind, or are they getting bolder? Does the light not bother them as much as the list implies? This entry sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I spent the next hour scanning the perimeter of the forest below. My own binoculars pressed so hard against my face, they left deep red rings around my eyes. Was that a flicker of movement by that cluster of ancient cedars? Was that shadow darker than it should be? The paranoia was infectious, a virus transmitted through the ink of the journal. I saw nothing, but the act of looking made me feel exposed, as if my attention were a beam of light pointing back at my own position. Driven, I returned to the journal. I felt I was getting close to the end, to the core of the mystery. My fingers, tracing the edge of the back cover, found a slight irregularity, a place where the leather was looser. Prying at it carefully, my nail caught the edge of a folded piece of paper tucked away inside a hidden slit. It was a single, small sheet, brittle with age. It wasn't another rule. It was a hand-drawn, surprisingly detailed schematic of the tower's electrical junction box. Thomas had circled the large, red-handled breaker switch for the exterior spotlight. Beside it, in tiny, cramped letters, he had written a note. The answer to the final question, the one you should never ask. Rule 6. Never, under any circumstances, activate the exterior spotlight after midnight. It was the only rule that hadn't been tested. It wasn't a defense, it was a prohibition, a command not to look behind the curtain. The other rules were about keeping the entity out. This one, I realized with a dawning horror, was about keeping me in. It was designed to protect me not from the entity, but from the truth of what it was. My hands were shaking so badly now that the journal pages rattled. I knew I had to read the final entries. I had to know what question Thomas had asked and what terrible answer he had received. I turned to the last few pages. The neat cursive was completely gone, replaced by a chaotic, almost violent scrawl that slashed across the paper. The words were a torrent of consciousness, a mind coming apart at the seams. December 11th. It won't stop. All night. It has her voice. My Lily. My little girl. She's 6 years old. She's safe at home with Helen. I know she is. But the thing outside doesn't care. It's using her laughter. The little giggle she makes when I push her on the swing. It's playing it on a loop right at the bottom of the ladder. Sometimes it changes to crying. Daddy, I'm scared of the dark. Let me in, Daddy. I've stuffed my ears with cotton, but I can still hear it. I hear it inside my head. The entry was stained with what looked like teardrops, smudging the ink. My own vision blurred as I read the final, terrible entry, dated the following night, December 12th. I can't do this anymore. The sound is too perfect. The mimicry is flawless. A part of my brain, the logical part, knows it's a trick, but the part that is a father is screaming. What if it's not a mimic? What if it's a recording? What if this thing, what if it has her? The doubt is a poison. It's worse than the fear. I have to know. I have to see what's making that sound. I can't fight an enemy I don't understand. I have to see its face. The list says not to. But the list doesn't have a child. I'm breaking Rule 6. I'm going to turn on the spotlight. God forgive me. I have to know. The last paragraph was a single, explosive burst of text, the pen having ripped through the paper in several places. My God. Oh my God. The light hit it. It's not a monster. Not one monster. It's them. A crowd of them, standing there at the base of the tower, looking up. They're wearing faces like masks. The hiker who went missing in September, the family that vanished from the campground last summer. They're all here. It collects them. But the face in the front, the one making the sound, but it's not Lily's face, it's a distortion of it. Something cobbled together from my memories. A puppet. Its eyes. Oh God. Its eyes are... The sentence ended there. An erratic, jagged line of ink, streaked from the final word to the bottom of the page, as if the pen had been dragged from Thomas's spasming hand. I let the journal fall from my lap. It hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded like a shovel full of dirt hitting a coffin. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of such profound and cosmic horror that I felt my sanity fracture. The entity didn't just imitate. It didn't just hunt. It curated. It assimilated. The voices on the radio, the apparitions, they were its trophies. The lost souls of this forest had become the building blocks of its psychological arsenal. Thomas hadn't simply vanished. He had been harvested. He was now, almost certainly, one of the masks, one of the voices. A new lure in the predator's tackle box. And the purpose of this tower, the job of the lookout, was not to watch for fires, but to be a lonely, tethered goat, a focal point for this ancient intelligence's unspeakable hunger, keeping it anchored here, sated and contained. A profound, deathly stillness settled over the room as this new reality calcified in my mind. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the windows with streaks of blood orange and deep purple. Night was coming, and this time I knew what I was facing. It was in that moment of absolute soul-crushing silence that the new sound began. It was not the wind. It was not from the radio. It was not a scratching at the windows. It was from below. Clang. The sound was deep and resonant, vibrating up the steel legs of the tower. It was the sound of something heavy, something with deliberate weight, stepping onto the first rung of the exterior ladder. My blood turned to slush. I was frozen, every muscle paralyzed. My ears strained, trying to convince myself it was the tower settling, the metal contracting in the evening chill. Clang. The second rung. Slower this time. Methodical. Unhurried. Whatever was climbing my tower was in no rush. It knew I was here. It knew I was trapped. Clang. Third rung. Each impact was a hammer blow to my heart. This was impossible. The rules were a covenant. I had followed them. I had endured the voices, the scraping, the psychological torture. I had survived. This wasn't supposed to happen. Clang. It was halfway up now. The sounds were closer, clearer. This was not the light, exploratory scraping of last night. This was heavy, purposeful, a physical, brutal assault. I scrambled backward, away from the trapdoor in the floor, my eyes wide with terror. The climbing stopped. A new sound reached me. The scrape of heavy boots on the metal grating of the catwalk just outside the lower door, the one below my feet. A heavy silence descended, a silence that felt heavier and more absolute than anything that had come before. I held my breath, listening, waiting. Then, a sound that severed the last thread of hope in my soul. A slow, metallic, grinding squeal. The sound of a hand closing around the cold, stiff handle of the hatch just below me. The sound of it beginning slowly and deliberately to turn. Time fractured. The universe contracted to the sound of that slowly turning handle, a grating metallic screech that was the sound of my life expectancy being revised downwards to 0. My breath caught in my lungs, a solid, painful knot. My muscles were not my own. They were rigid, useless statues, locked in place by a current of pure, undiluted terror. The deadbolt inside the hatch, the one I had thrown with such casual annoyance what felt like a lifetime ago, was the only thing between me and the collected nightmares of this forest. It was a single, inch-thick piece of steel against an eternity of malevolence. Click. The handle reached the end of its rotation. The latch mechanism on the other side was now fully disengaged. The only thing holding the door shut was my bolt. For a heartbeat, there was silence. A terrifying, analytical silence. I could feel the intelligence on the other side of that door, considering this new obstacle, this minor inconvenience. The thought was more horrifying than any mindless brute force. It was a problem solver. Then came the first impact. It was not a bang or a knock. It was a concussive seismic event, a sound that was felt as much as it was heard. The entire tower shuddered on its foundations, a deep resonant boom that vibrated up the steel legs, through the floor, and into the soles of my feet. The metal groaned in protest. The books on my shelf rattled, and one tumbled to the floor with a pathetic flutter of pages. I was thrown forward, catching myself on the edge of the console, my own gasp for air lost in the deafening shockwave of the blow. My paralysis shattered, replaced by a frantic, animalistic panic. My mind, a frantic mess of broken thoughts, tried to scream, to run, to pray all at once. There was nowhere to run. Boom. The second impact was even more powerful. This time, the overhead lights flickered violently, and a fine shower of dust and rust particles rained down from the ceiling. A high-pitched metallic shriek followed the blow, the sound of stressed, bending steel. The hatch was buckling. That single inch of metal was failing. I scrambled away from the center of the room, my body acting on pure instinct. I pressed myself into the farthest corner, as if putting another 10 feet between myself and the door would somehow matter. My mind was a maelstrom. Thomas's words from the journal echoed in the chaos. It collects them. I was about to be collected. My voice, my memories, my face, they would all be added to the creature's ghastly repertoire. I would become the next ghost to haunt the radio waves, the next phantom to scratch at the windows for some other poor soul. Boom! A spiderweb of cracks appeared in one of the windows from the sheer vibration. The tower swayed, a skyscraper in an earthquake. How many more hits could it take? 2? 1? The thing outside was relentless. its strength geologic, its patience infinite. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, a defense, anything. A fire extinguisher, a coffee mug. The futility was laughable. What could I possibly do against something that could punch through solid steel? Then my gaze fell on Thomas's journal, lying open on the floor where I had dropped it. The page was open to his last frantic entry, but my eyes were drawn to the small folded schematic I had found tucked into the cover, the one showing the junction box. The answer to the final question, he had written. But maybe it was the answer to this one too. What other secrets had he hidden? I crawled towards it, my movements a clumsy, desperate scuttle. Boom! This time the sound was different. It was accompanied by the sharp, piercing shriek of tearing metal. It was breaking through. I snatched up the journal, my fingers frantically searching its pages, no longer reading but scanning for anything, any clue, any last-ditch strategy. My eyes caught a frantic annotation in a margin I'd overlooked, scribbled next to a passage about a generator malfunction. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. If it breaches, if all rules fail, it is drawn to the spark, to the life. The electricity is a beacon, our heat is a scent. Darkness is the only blanket, the only camouflage. The junction box, the main breaker. It wasn't about the spotlight, it was about everything. The lights, the radio, the low hum of the refrigerator. Every watt of power was a flare in the darkness, screaming, "I am here, crack screek!" A sliver of the hatch had given way. I could hear the wind whistling through a new opening. It was now or never. The junction box was on the opposite wall, next to the door leading down to the stairwell. It was the longest journey of my life. I launched myself into a stumbling run, my feet slipping on the dusty floor. The tower reeled from another titanic blow, and I was thrown against the kitchenette counter, my shoulder screaming in pain. I ignored it. Adrenaline, hot and sharp, coursed through me. I reached the wall, my fingers fumbling with the latch on the grey metal door of the breaker box. I tore it open. Inside was a row of black switches and one large red-handled lever at the top, marked Main Power. With the sound of tortured metal groaning its final complaint from below, I grabbed the lever with both hands, closed my eyes, and threw all my weight downwards. The world ended. The immediate plunge into absolute sensory deprivation was a physical blow. The hum of the electronics, the glow of the console, the dim overhead light, all vanished in an instant. The only things left were the howling of the wind outside and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing, which seemed obscenely loud in the new void. The tower was now just a cold, dead shell of steel and glass, inert and lifeless, and the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was more profound than any I had ever experienced. It was a thick, viscous silence that filled my ears and pressed against my skin. Had it worked? Had the creature drawn by the spark lost its target? Or was it merely pausing, confused by the sudden change? I didn't move. I stood with my hand still on the breaker, every nerve ending screaming. My eyes, useless in the pitch black, strained to see, creating phantom shapes and fleeting sparks in the darkness. My hearing, now my only reliable sense, became painfully acute. I could hear the tiny creaks of the tower as it settled. I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. I slid down the wall to the floor, my legs no longer able to support me. I was a blind animal in a cage with a predator that could be anywhere. The thought was a fresh spike of ice in my gut. What if it was already inside? What if that last blow had been enough? What if it was now in the stairwell or on the other side of the room, listening, waiting, just as I was? The night became a waking nightmare that stretched for an eternity. Paranoia became my only companion. I held my breath until my lungs burned, trying to minimize the sound of my own existence. Every floorboard that groaned with the shifting of the tower's weight was the creature taking a slow, deliberate step towards me. The whisper of my own clothing as I shifted my weight was the sound of its approach. I began to hallucinate. In the crushing blackness, I saw faces, Thomas's, my mother's, their eyes hollow and accusing. I heard whispers that were not the wind, fragments of the radio calls, promises of release, invitations to step out into the dark. My mind was turning on itself, the isolation and terror carving new, terrifying pathways through my consciousness. I felt something brush against my outstretched hand, and I recoiled with a strangled yelp, only to realize it was the strap from my own fallen backpack. I crawled away from the breaker box, seeking the relative safety of the open floor, my hands sweeping the space in front of me, dreading the moment they would touch something that wasn't supposed to be there, something cold and hard, or worse, something yielding and organic. I was reduced to a primal state, a creature of instinct, whose only goal was to remain still and silent until the sun returned. I made a bargain, not with God, but with the abstract concept of dawn itself. Just get me to the light. Just let me see the morning. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had become a meaningless concept. There was only the long, suffocating dark. And then I saw it. A change. It wasn't light, not yet. It was a subtle dilution of the absolute blackness in one direction. The eastern windows were no longer an impenetrable wall of ink, but a charcoal grey. A faint, razor-thin line of the deepest indigo appeared on the horizon. Dawn. I watched unmoving, as the sky slowly, painstakingly bled from black to purple to a bruised orange, from orange to a pale, anemic grey. Light, real and tangible, began to seep back into the room, chasing the shadows into the corners. It revealed the chaos of the overturned chair, the fallen book, the dust that coated every surface. It revealed that I was alone. I remained on the floor until the sun had fully cleared the mountains, painting the interior with bright, hopeful shafts of morning light. I had never been so grateful for the simple gift of sight. I was trembling uncontrollably, a deep, cellular tremor of a nervous system that had been pushed far beyond its limits. I was alive. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet, using the wall for support. My body was a tapestry of aches and bruises. I stumbled to the breaker box and, with a deep, shuddering breath, I threw the main lever back up. The lights flickered on, and the console whirred back to life with a series of reassuring beeps. The tower was alive again, and so was I. My final task was to face the truth of the night. I had to see the hatch. Dreading what I would find, I walked to the trapdoor in the floor and peered down into the stairwell. The lower door was still closed. I descended the steps, each footfall on the metal stairs echoing the phantom impacts from the night. I reached the bottom landing and stopped. The air was frigid. Wind was definitely getting through. I looked at the hatch, and my breath caught in my throat. The steel door was no longer flat. It bulged inward, a massive concave dent at its center, as if it had been struck by a wrecking ball. The metal was warped and twisted, the paint cracked and peeling. Around the edges of the primary impact point were 4 deep parallel gouges, each about 2 feet long, that had sliced through the steel as if it were clay. They were not from a tool. They were not from any animal I could name. They were the clear, unmistakable marks of colossal claws. I had survived. I hadn't won. I had simply endured. And staring at the brutal, physical evidence of the entity's power, I knew with a chilling certainty that the sun was only a temporary reprieve. The night would fall again, and it would come back for me. The longest night of my life was coming to an end, but the worst was yet to come. The sun was a liar, its warmth a hollow promise. It couldn't burn away the truth that was now seared into the back of my mind, the knowledge of what paced and plotted in the deep places of the forest. Before we discover that final, terrible truth together, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel and comment below with your own theory. What do you think these creatures truly are? Because I have my answer now, and it's worse than anything I could have imagined. The hours that followed sunrise were a masterclass in psychological collapse. I moved through the tower like a ghost, a haunted man in a haunted house. I documented the damage to the hatch in the official station log, my pen scratching across the page. I used the coded language I now understood was protocol. Show 630, significant structural damage to ground-level hatch due to what is assessed to be nocturnal seismic activity and extreme wind shear. It was a language of deliberate blindness, a conspiracy of silence against the impossible. I was already an accomplice. I tried to eat, but the canned food tasted like sawdust. I tried to drink coffee, but my hands trembled so violently that most of it sloshed over the rim of the mug. My body had survived, but my mind was a wreck. It kept replaying the sounds of the night, the splintering of steel, the voice of my mother, the patient exploratory scratching against the glass. The silence of the day was no comfort, it was merely a stage being reset for the next performance. The smoke from the distant inviting fire had vanished with the dawn, but I could still see it when I closed my eyes. Around noon, a new sound intruded upon my vigil. It was faint at first, a low thrumming that was more a vibration in my chest than a noise. It grew steadily, resolving itself into the familiar rhythmic chopping of helicopter blades. Salvation. The sound was so beautiful, so overwhelmingly potent with the promise of rescue and a return to the sane world, that I broke down. Sobs racked my body, tears of profound, grateful relief streaming down my face. They were coming for me. Someone must have picked up on the stress in my voice during the morning check-in. They knew something was wrong. I was going home. I stumbled out onto the narrow catwalk that encircled the observation room, waving my arms frantically as the helicopter, a sleek black Bell 407, a significant upgrade from Jed's battered machine, swept into view. It didn't land on the small helipad, but hovered expertly, its rotors whipping up a furious wind. A side door slid open, and a man in a crisp dark suit began to descend on a rope ladder. He moved with an unnerving, calm proficiency, not a hint of fear or exertion on his face as he dangled 100 feet above the jagged rocks. He landed on the catwalk as lightly as a cat. He was in his 50s with neatly trimmed silver hair and a face that was unnervingly smooth, as if it had never been exposed to the elements. He wore polished leather shoes, a completely absurd choice for this environment. He looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom meeting. He gave me a thin, professional smile and extended a hand. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice calm and level, a stark contrast to my ragged, hyperventilating state. "I'm Sterling, Regional Oversight. Mind if I come in?" He didn't wait for an answer, stepping past me into the tower. I followed, dumbfounded, my dreams of immediate rescue deflating. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a performance review. Sterling's eyes swept the room, taking in the overturned chair, the general disarray, his gaze lingering for a moment on the open journal on the floor. He showed no surprise, no alarm. He walked to the trapdoor and peered down at the grotesquely damaged hatch. "Impressive," he murmured, his tone that of an art critic appraising a particularly bold sculpture. "It hasn't tried a direct breach like this in years. You must have really gotten its attention." It tried to kill me," I stammered, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate torrent. The radio, the voices, the scratching, it was all real, all of it. The man before me, Thomas, he wrote it all down. "This place isn't safe, there's something out here." Sterling turned to face me, his expression unchanged. It was a look of infinite, soul-wearying patience. "We know, Alex. Of course it's real. Why else would we have the rules?" The simple, logical statement struck me dumb. You know?" I whispered. "My department has been managing this anomaly for over 70 years, he said, walking over to the console and running a gloved finger over its surface. "Sentinel Peak isn't a fire lookout tower, not anymore. The fires are a convenient fiction. This is a containment post, an anchor." The word hung in the air, heavy and cold. Anchor. The entity or entities, the taxonomy is still a matter of debate, is territorially bound, Sterling explained, his voice taking on the detached quality of a professor giving a lecture. Deeply, anciently so, but its territory can expand if left unchecked. It requires a focal point, a consciousness, a solitary human mind on which to fixate its attention. As long as someone is here, enduring its nightly phenomena and most importantly following the rules, it remains anchored to this mountain. It concentrates its efforts here. You, Alex, are not here to watch for fires. You are here to be watched. The bottom dropped out of my world. The tower wasn't a shield, it was a lightning rod. I was the bait, tethered to a stake to keep the beast occupied. "Thomas, what happened to him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Anderson served his purpose admirably for 6 months, Sterling said, a hint of something that might have been approval in his tone. "But the psychological toll is considerable. He eventually broke a rule, a rather important one, it seems. When that happens, the anchor comes loose, containment is breached. The entity gets what it wants. "And what does it want?" I choked out, dreading the answer. Sterling looked at me, his eyes as cold and grey as a winter sky. "It wants to add to its collection. We call them echoes. It absorbs the consciousness, the memories, the very essence of its victims. It learns from them. It uses them to become a more effective hunter. Thomas Anderson is no longer missing, Alex. He's simply been integrated. He is now a part of the phenomenon. The full crushing weight of the truth descended upon me. The voices, the faces, they were all real. A choir of the damned, wielded by an ancient, unknowable horror. "So you're here to take me home," I said, my voice trembling with a desperate, fragile hope. "My tour is over." For the first time, Sterling's professional mask cracked into a smile. It was a bloodless, reptilian thing that did not reach his eyes. "You misunderstand the nature of your employment. Your posting doesn't end. You're the new anchor. You don't get transferred until a replacement is needed. And a replacement is only needed when the current operative breaks a rule." The air left my lungs. The hope that had buoyed me just minutes before collapsed into a black hole of despair. I wasn't being rescued. I was being reassured of my purpose. There was no escape. There was no going home. This was my life now, a cycle of sunlit dread and nocturnal terror, waiting for the inevitable night when I, like Thomas, would finally break. "The helicopter is dropping off your next 3 months of supplies," Sterling continued, oblivious or indifferent to my silent agony. "Among them you will find a new blank journal. It is imperative that you document everything. Your experiences, the entity's tactics, your psychological state. Your data is invaluable. When your tenure here concludes, we will retrieve your journal and leave it for your replacement." He gestured to Thomas's journal on the floor. "Just as we left his for you." He walked to the door and paused. "You've done well, Alex. You survived a direct assault. You've proven to be a resilient anchor. Just keep following the rules, that's all you have to do." He descended the rope ladder back to the hovering helicopter. As it rose into the sky, a large crate of supplies was lowered onto the helipad. Then, the helicopter turned and flew away, its sound diminishing until it was once again swallowed by the immense eternal silence of the wilderness. I was alone again, but this was a new kind of alone. It was the absolute bottomless solitude of a man condemned to a life sentence in a prison the size of a mountain range. There was no escape. There was no hope. There was only the duty, the rules, and the waiting. I walked numbly over to the newly deposited crate. On top, nestled amongst the boxes of canned goods and bags of coffee, was a new journal. It was identical to Thomas's, with a clean, unblemished leather cover, full of empty pages waiting to be filled with terror. I carried it back inside and set it on the console. My eyes drifted to the window. The sun was already beginning its descent, the afternoon light growing long and golden. Soon the shadows would creep out from the valleys. Soon the night would return, bringing with it the scratching, the voices, the pressure against the glass. But this time I knew the truth. I was not a victim in a haunted house. I was a zookeeper, and the bars of the cage were my own sanity. I was a lighthouse keeper on the shore of a sea of absolute horror, and my only job was to keep the light burning, to keep the monster focused on me, until the day I inevitably failed and became part of the storm myself. I picked up Thomas's journal one last time, a relic from a man I now knew intimately. Then I set it aside and opened the new one to the first blank page. I picked up a pen. My hand, I noticed, was perfectly steady. The terror had given way to a strange, cold resignation. I knew my purpose. My name is Alex Davies, and I am the lookout at Sentinel Peak. If you are reading this, it is because I finally broke a rule. It is because my watch is over, and they have come to collect me. This journal and the rules contained within are all I have left to give. They are your only chance. Now it's your turn. I began to write, the scratching of my pen the only sound in the room as the sun set, and the world outside my window was once again swallowed by the dark.